Before I hand it off to Sophos, I'm going to do a quick, maybe 3-minute introduction here. I want to get to the topic of cybersecurity and to the experts as soon as possible. But a little bit about Pine Cove. We've been in business since 1993. We support more than 20,000 end users daily. You can see on our map there, we kind of cover the Rocky Mountain region. And then we do service a few clients outside of that, but this is our primary area of operation. We specialize in solving complex problems. So a lot of IT providers are more of a fulfillment center where you just need this specific part or this specific solution. We do offer that, obviously, but we do want to work with you in a more personal way to help you solve those challenges that you're experiencing within your organization specifically. So for example, a lot of the clients we've worked with from when we started the company in 1993 are still working with us today, just having us on as a trusted advisor and continue to consult them as they encounter new problems as technology evolves. We've got a few awards this year, which has been exciting. We've been recognized as one of the top 500 IT providers in the country. So we're excited about that. We take pride in being personal and somewhat small, but we do serve a pretty significant client base. So exciting news on that this year. When we talk about the services we offer, we talk about this 5-step process. So like I said in the last slide, it's much more than just fulfilling a specific solution. We want to make sure that the solution works within your environment and is sustainable. So the way we do that is start first by analyzing your current IT environment to make sure, to see what solutions you have in place and to make sure if we are going to implement any solutions, they're going to work with what you already have. Design, so we'll design based off of our findings in our assessment or in the analyze phase. We'll design a solution that works for you. We can then deploy that solution in conjunction with your team. And of course, offer support and then sustain. We want to make sure that you can plan in the future for future upgrades and avoid IT expiration and just make sure that you're up to date on your IT solutions. So that's just kind of the 5-step process that we employ. It's more of it reveals more about who we are as a company and how we like to work with our clients. So enough of that. I'm done talking. Except as you feel and you have any questions, I'll field those to our presenters. But we're excited to be joined today with Sophos. We've been a partner with them since 2002, so we've been in it with them for the long haul. And we've got some pretty important topics we're talking about today. So I'm going to hand off my presenter role to Anthony, who's going to jump into the presentation today. And Anthony, you should have control of the screen now. You're muted, by the way.
I am showing my screen now. You got that?
Yep, looks great.
Awesome. All right, g'day everyone. My name is Anthony and I am the sales engineer for Sophos and I cover the Rockies area, hence the reason I'm on this call with you. And I have been working closely with Pine Cove. Together with them, we bring sort of the best-in-class cybersecurity products. And so don't hesitate to reach out to them if you've got any Sophos questions, and they have direct access to myself and my team. So what are we known for? Sophos is known for security made simple. Sophos is also known for being a 35-year leader in the cybersecurity space, as well as we're known for our 18-year partnership with Pine Cove. We are known to have a full cybersecurity stack and ecosystem, as well as you may already know us for the best endpoint protection on the planet. Now, with that last bullet, there may be some thoughts that Anthony's going to be giving yet another InterceptX demo, going through features and all that kind of good gear, but that's actually not the case. This presentation is going to be primarily focused on helping you understand and see with a simple license upgrade from InterceptX to help you cover those gaps that are in your environment that you may not be aware of that currently exist. And whether it's from InterceptX or whether it's from another endpoint protection, there's going to be gaps there that I'm going to help identify. So today, with endpoint protection, with antivirus, there's two main areas that are seen inside of an endpoint product. And one is either the signature-based, sort of behavioral-based type endpoint protection, your antivirus, which is looking at that malicious behavior, those, it's designed to help lower that attack surface, and even it's going to be kind of cleaning up or quarantining those malicious attacks or malicious files and throwing it in a quarantine for you to look at or play with later. But then there's also the next gen AV, which that is using some form of AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence there to help detect and prevent against your zero-day attacks, to help prevent exploit techniques being leveraged and used, and even in a lot of cases, or in some cases, I should say, stopping ransomware, like in the way of InterceptX. Now, we've relied on AV, so antivirus, for years to protect us and to keep our machines and our environment safe, and rightfully so. Unfortunately, just having endpoint protection, even if it's the best endpoint protection on the planet, it's just not quite enough to completely cover those areas and these gaps, which I'm going to be touching on today, covering those gaps and keeping you ahead of the malicious actors. So with the right tools, with the right process, and even with the right people together, with us and Sophos and our partnership with Pine Cove and even Sophos's team, we can help you do that. And the gaps that I'm talking about, so the core element of security is its ability to be able to determine whether something that's having an activity of being benign or malicious. But there's also an area of uncertainty. And so that area that we refer to, this gray area, in this case, you can see this shark-infested area. And that's, for example, where Bruce likes to play. We're going to call that the gap. Okay, so traditional tools, they're typically reasonably weak at protection. And leaving a lot of this middle ground, a large gap for incidents that normally you would desire and that you want, that need to be stopped, but the tools that you currently have just don't quite meet it. Now, to be able to help you understand an example of a gap, we're talking about items that lurk in those areas of things, for instance, like a machine that hasn't installed all of the Microsoft security patches. So your antivirus product today will not be able to highlight that. You've got this vulnerability because there's a security patch not installed, and your AV just doesn't quite meet that muster to be able to tell you that that's actually lacking. So this is where the Sophos InterceptX with EDR, focus there on the EDR component, is really designed to help you cover that gap, right? So to help to get you closer to seeing what's going on and to be able to get visibility. And what EDR stands for those that this term may be new to, it stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. So Sophos has an EDR product that in the business with this ability to close the gap, right, to make that gap smaller. So, and we do that with the InterceptX. As I mentioned, this isn't an InterceptX demo, but it is to be noted, and it must be noted, that due to having InterceptX and the fact that it's the best in the business, it does make that gap significantly smaller because we are stopping more threats and we are filtering out a lot more noise. But that said, there's still a gap that's left to be covered. And so this is where the EDR can come in. So even though it's significantly smaller, adversaries are aware of this gap, they know how to target that gap, and they're becoming increasingly more sophisticated at getting closer to the bullseye and really kind of chipping away at that gap. So therefore, having that appropriate tool set, gaining that visibility and that insight, and the ability to be able to respond to those types of attacks that are lurking in that gap, this is where that EDR comes into play. Now, Sophos, we have gone and created an EDR product from the ground up, and we've created this tool that is absolutely primed for security analysts as well as IT generalists. Okay, so it's a really solid tool that can that can bring you closer to gaining the right amount of insight into what's actually happening inside of your environment. Now, how do we do that? For your security analysts, they really want to go about doing some threat hunting, right? So they really want to go and start digging in and finding out what's actually going on. And with this EDR tool from Sophos, we can start asking questions like what processes are trying to make a network connection on non-standard ports. We could even say things like list detected indicators of compromise and map that to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We could even, for instance, search for details about PowerShell executions or even identify processes disguised as another executable. In this case, for instance, a services.exe. Now, then for your IT operations, okay, so again, I said threat hunting and the capability there, and I just literally scratched the surface for your security analysts. But then we also provide a tool for your IT operations team. Now, with your IT operations team, they're probably less concerned about hunting per se, but they are the ones that are going to be concerned about the patches, or they're going to be concerned and wanting to ask questions. For instance, like, why is my machine slow? What's is it pending a reboot? Are there any critical services running? And are those running? For instance, is disk encryption enabled? Is the machine actually encrypted? Is the firewall running? And so on, right? So then with having a tool, a powerful tool like Sophos EDR, we give you that ability to be able to specifically and directly ask any endpoint in your environment, essentially any question you want to ask. Are there programs running on a machine that should be removed? What Chrome extensions are installed, and so on. So with that, part of the features that come with Sophos InterceptX with EDR is this tool called Live Discover, right? Live Discover is an ability to be able to gain those deeper and discover those deeper insights, giving you rich endpoint searching capability to be able to, whether you're doing a hunt or whether you're just doing some IT operations, if you need to look past and beyond that of just a malware event, you want to look for suspicious files, you want to look for those that activity that's been going on in your environment, you can use this tool to be able to identify those things. It's using SQL queries that we found that using SQL gives us better detail. We've got a whole bunch of canned queries. So you'll see right there in the little screenshot, it says 21. Today, we're actually up to about 82 canned queries. But then also we give you the ability to create your own custom queries. And then also, again, being able to give you on disk live access to hit up that machine for anything you want to know that's happened over the last 90 days. Very, very, very powerful. Now, to go with that, we have live response. So this is that ability to be able to respond to said event or respond to whatever you may have found inside of your live discovery event and query. And you have the ability to remotely remediate via command line on any device on your network or off your network. It does not matter where this endpoint sits in the world. We have visibility through this tool, and also not just the visibility, but the control, the ability to be able to remotely, when I say we, I mean you and your admins that have this tool, have the ability, especially in cases of like right now that we're going through with the Rona kicking around, we still need to be able to have visibility and gain access to these endpoints. And with live response, you can do that. You need to be able to kick off a reboot, go for it. You need to terminate an active process, go for it. Run a script, uninstall, install software, you name it, you can do it by command line on any machine where it sits anywhere in the world. Now, key point here, that sounds like a lot of access, and it absolutely is. So it's all recorded from an auditing perspective, and it's also fronted by MFA, so multi-factor authentication. So from a security perspective, we've got you covered. Now, just again to highlight the main benefits of EDR, and this complements the handout that you actually saw, and that's available, the PDF that Pine Cove have made available inside of this webinar. Through Sophos EDR, we've given you a tool for your IT operations as well as your threat hunting, giving you the ability to look deeper, detect suspicious threats, and respond faster. And that's what it's all about when we start talking about having a malicious attack or an event going on in your environment. So again, Sophos EDR will be able to help you bridge that gap and get you closer to where you need to be in keeping your environment safe. Now, I'm going to guess that everybody on this call has heard of Pinterest. Now, with Pinterest, my wife loves it. I've had many projects on there, and I don't know about you, but for me, it's turned out a lot like this. Okay, so Pinterest on the left, this cupcake thing looked real awesome, and yet, as you can see on the right, I nailed it. Now, in nailing a project, that's, being able to follow the instructions, seeing what's going on, that's all good and well, and having the right amount of ingredients and all that kind of good stuff. Now, the cupcake still tastes awesome, but it didn't exactly turn out the way that I had hoped. Now, that said, this is where I can help you lead into finding out about MTR. So I'm going to hand the time over to my coworker and friend Greg, who is going to be able to share with you how bridging the gap can happen with Sophos MTR, right? So before with EDR, we're talking about covering that gap, giving you that tool set. And now we're talking about combining the best tools with some of the brightest minds to be able to detect and respond, not only to more sophisticated attacks, but also to those brand new attacks that have never been seen before. So with that, Greg, I will hand the time over to you, mate.
Anthony, thank you very much. I think that's probably my first ever cupcake segue on a webinar. So
You're welcome.
I do appreciate that. Well, thanks a lot to you and to Pine Cove to give me the opportunity to talk about the Sophos Managed Threat Response Service. Just as a point of reference, this is a service that we've offered since October of this past year. So it's been under the Sophos umbrella for about 3 quarters. That being said, we made some acquisitions, and the SOC delivering it has been doing it for over 10 years. We're really excited about this. We actually just got some insights from analysts right now. I can't share them yet, but I can say that we're one of the largest managed detection and response companies now already in the world after just 3 quarters. The growth in this has been explosive. That being said, though, I want to just kind of cover how this service works. Anthony did a good job of showing you the underlying technology. What I like to share with people, though, is that when you're going through a decision-making process and you're trying to ask the question, do I want to do all these tasks on my own? In other words, do I have the staffing? Do I have the knowledge? Do I have the time? It's kind of the 3 a.m. on Christmas question, right? Or New Year's question is there someone who's going to answer the bell when something bad happens in the off hours? Because frankly speaking, that's when most of these attacks take place. Most of our adversaries now are staging their attacks such that they do it during off business hours. So I kind of present this as a fork in the road where you can kind of choose to do it on your own. The truth of the matter is if you purchase the Sophos Managed Threat Response Service, you get the EDR capabilities that Anthony is describing, so you still get access to that tooling. You're just saying, hey, I want a 24/7 team that not only can find all these really advanced threats, but can respond to them, actually help me clean up the mess, not just having someone say, oh, we saw a fire at your house, you better go get a hose and put it out. So let's talk about how we have orchestrated this particular solution. What's nice about it, there we go. What's nice about the solution is that it's built over the top of the existing endpoint agent that you guys probably are familiar with already, InterceptX. What you would essentially be doing if you're interested in the service is purchasing a license, and that license essentially unlocks additional capabilities in the service offering itself. So what's happening underneath the hood? Well, what we're really doing is a couple of things. We're actually conducting a lot of threat hunts, and we refer to them as scheduled queries. So those scheduled queries essentially have a couple of different sources of information, what we like to refer to as trailheads in this industry. The first source of information is actually things that were blocked by InterceptX Advanced. So I'll give you an example. There is a tool that's available called Mimikatz. And that's a tool that's essentially used not only by penetration testers, but by adversaries to steal credentials. And as you can imagine, that wouldn't be good, especially if you had some of your admins with stolen credentials, because then an attacker can do some malicious activity. Well, it's great if InterceptX Advanced blocks that activity, but the question then becomes, why did that even try to run? What systems tried to run it? What users were logged in? What other devices did it touch? What kicked off that process exactly? So that's one source of trailhead. The second source, and probably the broadest source of what we like to refer to as trailheads, or the beginnings of queries, are these EDR capabilities. So we run a whole series of broad-based questions. There's over 60 of them. Yep.
Sorry, brother. Right now we see just your PowerPoint screen sitting on the threat response window. So we see PowerPoint. We're not actually seeing the slide that you're referencing.
Oh, okay. Let's stop and restart sharing. Sorry about that. Let's restart it. How about now?
Yep, you just need to switch the display.
Switcheroo, you got it. Okay. Good?
For me, it's still showing the same. It doesn't look like it switched.
Let's stop one more time. We'll do this. We will just show the whole screen. How about now?
Just need to switch the display.
Again. Oh my gosh.
Sorry, mate.
Yeah, no, my apologies.
There you go.
Okay, all right. Apologies about that. Okay, so yeah, we were talking about essentially all of the different sources of information that we use to conduct threat hunts. My point is that the most broad set of hunts that we conduct utilize these EDR tools. So we ask these really broad questions like, show me all of the network connections not running over ports 80 and 443. That's a good example. It's a question that you can imagine will return a lot of results, and most of those will be benign. So the question then becomes, how do we prioritize those answers, right? Even if you have 500 systems, we might get hundreds of results, and we run that question once every 10 minutes. So we repeat it over and over again. So the answer to that is we actually have telemetry from all of the Sophos devices throughout the world, hundreds of millions of devices, endpoints, servers, firewalls, you name it. And essentially we build a model saying, here is the recent adversary activity. And we compare these results to this recent adversary activity and we say, how similar is this? And if it exceeds a threshold, it drops into a queue for a human to analyze. And they'll start asking questions like, let me see what this remote IP address is. Is this used in any recent campaigns? Who is the user and when did they do this, right? Were they doing this on an endpoint? And does it look like that endpoint maybe was in China and really they should be based out of Seattle? That would also be anomalous. So they start asking some of these questions about enrichment to determine, is this malicious or is it benign? If it's benign, they can obviously do some rule tuning. If it's malicious, then they have the ability to respond. And that's really what differentiates a lot of the service here. And we have what are known as response modes. So response modes essentially inform our SOC to say, here is what I want you to do if you do find something bad. Notify essentially just says, hey, we found something bad, but you, the customer, can go and clean it up. Most people don't choose that. On the other end of the spectrum is what we refer to as authorize. In other words, if we find something bad, we will clean up the threat for you on your behalf, and then we'll send you notification after the fact. We'll either pick up the phone and call you or shoot you an email. The middle ground is collaborate, where if we do find something bad, essentially we will work with you and your team, or we'll ask for permission to clean that up. And you can even kind of check a box to say, hey, if this is off hours and I don't respond to you, just bump me into authorize. It means that it's party time for you and you don't have time to clean up the threat. So we have two service levels for our offerings, standard and advanced. The standard tier of our offering includes those response modes. And then it also includes that threat hunting that I shared with you as a result. we also include a couple of other features. Namely, we conduct a security health check. So I'm sure a lot of you are probably not aware, we have an incident response service in soft launch right now. We're not actually advertising it fully, but we have done incident response cleanup for a lot of customers. And even when you have a fantastic endpoint product, what kind of makes people pull their hair out is that a lot of people are just not monitoring the configuration of that product on a regular basis. And so over time, people do things like turn off protections or add exclusions for tools. And essentially adversaries are taking advantage of those holes that you've started poking through those really good products, whether it be Sophos or something else. So what we're saying is, hey, let's just make sure that your endpoint protection product is in an optimal configuration. Let's start from a good posture, because if we can actually block a lot of the threats on the front end, that means we can conduct really advanced threat hunts on the back end. And I think that's really compelling for a lot of people. The second service tier for our offering is MTR Advanced. I like to highlight a couple of things. Number one, we will use enhanced telemetry. So for those of you who use a Sophos XG firewall or Sophos Cloud Optics, those are what we refer to as connectors. We will ingest data from those other sources as a trailhead to begin investigation. So you can imagine on a firewall where you might see brute force activity, or you might see an IPS alert trigger based off of some other anomalous activity. Maybe you have some unmanaged assets that aren't running InterceptX Advanced yet, and you haven't spoken to us about it yet. That's fine. The enhanced telemetry is a way to provide broader coverage and coverage into other focus areas. The other point that I would share is that we provide 24/7 direct call-in support. You can actually speak with the SOC directly. Let's say you're running your own threat hunts in EDR and you want help writing some of those queries because maybe you've seen some crazy login behavior where you see a whole bunch of failed logins and you're not quite sure how to address it. Pick up the phone, talk to us at any point in the day. We're happy to help you out on that front as well. So a lot of services in this space actually don't even allow you to call in, because really what they're just doing is automated threat hunting. In other words, they're just using an EDR tool and trying to clean up automatically. They're not leveraging the power of human intelligence, and we have that at our disposal here as well. So if I were to pull this all together, these are all the sources for the threat hunts right now. So in the upper right-hand corner, you see InterceptX Advanced. We actually look at even a lot of the blocks or protections where they've kicked in appropriately and ask the question, why did this happen? The left-hand side there, the EDR tooling provides broad coverage to endpoints and servers to ask questions of this and even more data. So you can see we have full visibility to endpoints and servers, which is frankly where most of the action happens from an adversary perspective. And then the lower right-hand corner there, the XG Firewall and Sophos Cloud Optics, are those connectors. So for those of you who are looking at MTR Advanced, we can pull in telemetry from those other sources. So you can see here, we've got a really wide view of the environment. It allows us to ask really broad questions. Now, I like to tell people that I am only going to give you a little bit of homework, and this is the little bit. For those of you who are not familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, I want you to just jot this name down when you have a chance. So MITRE is a not-for-profit organization. They're technically quasi-governmental. And if you've ever heard of like the STIX taxi standard for threat intelligence, they also authored that. The attack framework is essentially a catalog of tactics, which is what you see along the horizontal axis. And underneath each tactic is an individual technique. So as an example, I could look at lateral movement, and you'll see here some of the first items are exploitation of remote services, internal spear phishing. So it's how I move from endpoint to endpoint or to server, so on and so forth. So essentially, it's a good catalog of everything that has been observed out in the wild. Now, this doesn't quantify how often each of these individual techniques are used, but what they do is they break down individual techniques into sub-techniques. So some of them only apply to different operating systems, sometimes even to subsets of those operating systems. And then when you look at an individual technique or sub-technique, they'll provide examples of how they've seen it, how you can actually block that technique from an adversary, how you can detect that particular technique, and then some other external reference material. So this is really useful for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you look at the framework in its totality, it's a good way to assess your coverage from an attack surface perspective. Can I block this number of techniques? And sometimes there could be more than one mechanism to block it. It's another useful tool in that you can evaluate solutions in terms of their coverage against specific techniques. And we use this to evaluate our service right now. And we will be going through the MITRE ATT&CK testing framework for our products on top of that, so people understand their efficacy as well. And then the last point that I would make when it comes to the MITRE ATT&CK is we actually use this as part of our investigation. So if we find something, whether it's good or bad, when those humans pick up those cases, we reference this against MITRE techniques. So number one, we're speaking a common language. And number two, if you happen to have another vendor's firewall or intrusion detection system or even like a switch, when we actually suggest remediation, you're not just using Sophos lingo, it's industry standard norms. So let me start to pull this all together. These are examples of threat hunts, and I just want to emphasize a couple of things. You don't have to necessarily dig into the weeds of what the threat hunts themselves are asking. But the first point that I would make is that you can probably tell these hunts run very regularly. In some cases, they run once per minute. In some cases, they only run once per day. But we can run them very frequently for a couple of reasons. Number one, because we do a really good job of blocking malicious traffic out of the box with InterceptX Advanced. There are some providers that are out there that say, oh, come with your existing endpoint product, we don't care what it is. Well, the problem with that is that a lot of them are really not on the podium like InterceptX Advanced is. And so they get these dashboards filled up with junk that really would have been blocked by an effective endpoint protection product. And then that also enables us to not only ask these really broad questions, but we can then leverage Sophos Labs to say, how similar is this to adversarial activity across the globe? And then we're also really fortunate because we've got a fantastic data science team, and they can actually model that traffic to say, here are good models to look at, PowerShell activity, or here are good models to look at network telemetry, or here are good models for indicators of compromise as well. So we really are pulling together a lot of resources to provide a really high value managed threat response service that is really advanced in nature and hasn't been available to small and medium-sized businesses and even enterprises at this level as well. And then when we do find something bad, we can actually respond to the threat. So you'll notice that a lot of these tools are essentially native. For those of you who are aware of InterceptX Advanced with EDR, to that tool set, so we can do this on your behalf, up to and including using live response. So this is that terminal that Anthony was showing you, this terminal access. So, if it is in the middle of the night and we do notice an adversary has gained a foothold in your environment, we can do things like kill processes, shut down network connections, remove a DLL, which is a common action for a lot of adversaries, up to and including just restarting a system, which is actually an appropriate response for a lot of adversaries who haven't established persistence, as we like to say. In other words, they can't actually survive a reboot of a system. But essentially, we can do anything because we have terminal access, and it is audited and does require approval when we use it. And then when it comes down to it, we provide monthly reporting to you today, so you get a good idea of all the activity within your environment, and you can kind of point your resources in the right direction to have better health moving forward. And then we're about to release this weekly case report that you see here as well. So anything that drops into our analyst queue, even if they don't escalate it to you, which is the majority of them, we still dismiss a lot of those cases, you'll still get some insight as to what it is they're investigating, the evidence that they gathered, and how they were able to determine that something was benign. Okay, Jace, Anthony, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover with the MTR service offering here today. So I wanted to pull you guys back in to see if we had questions popping up in the queue here.
Sounds good. Thanks for that. We do have a few questions. I'll just invite everyone. If you're looking for where to submit a question, it's on the GoToWebinar sidebar under the questions tab. And I'm not sure which of you to direct this one to, but it applies to what both of you were talking about, which is why do you need anything above and beyond InterceptX?
Sure. I'll take that one first. I'm sure AB will have some commentary on it as well. So there's essentially 3 areas of focus that you need to consider when it comes to not just InterceptX Advanced, but any really good endpoint protection product. The first is that example that I shared earlier, in that you have to be extremely diligent with your configuration. If you use the recommended configuration where you turn on all protections based off of the vendor's recommendation, and you enter 0 exclusions, congratulations, you're now in rarefied company here. But the truth of the matter is that those happen on a regular basis. And if you don't write those as specifically as possible and for as short amount of time period as possible, you're essentially opening up your attack surface. So the first is just monitoring the health of your existing product and soon to be products, especially with those of you using the XG firewall. So that's the first point, is a lot of people essentially hamper or hamstring existing endpoint protection products. The second point that I would make is that there are actually advanced attacks that even something like InterceptX Advanced won't be able to block out of the box. And typically these leverage existing tools already running within your environment that are allowed. So a lot of you probably allow PowerShell to run. It's a scripting utility. In and of itself, it's not good or bad, but it's a popular tool set. And so you can't block all those scripts right out of the box. And there's not a great mechanism yet to be able to determine which of these are good or bad, because they're all unique to your environment. So these are commonly referred to as living off of the land style attacks. So you really need a threat hunting service to be able to look for those advanced adversaries within those environments. And then the third example is, unfortunately, in some cases, there are endpoints or servers that either don't have an agent installed, or something happens where the health of those agents is interfered with in some way, shape, or form. So to be able to have coverage against those assets that aren't being fully managed or aren't fully healthy also provides some clarity. So it's, to sum it up, it's making sure that the assets that you've got are in good health and remain in good health. Number 2, and probably the biggest one, is actually those advanced style attacks that you just can't block out of the box. And number 3, those assets that actually don't have coverage today. AB, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit all the nails on the head. At the end of the day, we're talking about having, with the question about why do I need something more than just InterceptX? InterceptX, picture it as in a football team. And when I'm talking football, I'm talking original football, the one that's round that you use your foot with. There's defense, right? So the best protection and prevention. So preventing a goal from happening and protection. So I've got the best defense going on, but yet we still need to be proactive. We still need to be able to go and find those areas, those holes, those things that wouldn't typically fall upon hitting on our defense, right? So in the example that I mentioned about that gap, where we're already closing the gap, which is, I'm glad was identified in your question by saying, hey, I've got InterceptX. I'm already closing that gap quite a lot, which is awesome. And that is the perfect start. But then we still have some, like for instance, in that one example that I gave with regard to having the Microsoft security patches installed, right? So there's a vulnerability. So vulnerabilities are different than sort of malicious activity. It's essentially like having a house without a window in it. It's sure you can be inside the home and you can be protecting any kind of bad activity going on inside the home, but ideally we want to patch said vulnerability with just your antivirus, whether it's InterceptX or any other kind of antivirus. They're not able to detect and be able to highlight some of those vulnerabilities. And this is where we can bring in the MTR service, like Greg was just talking about, proactively going and finding whether it's, you know, a tool that's already in the house now being used maliciously, or for instance, like PowerShell, or if it's a vulnerability that's already available in the operating system alone that is left unpatched. And so I think that there's a couple of use cases that we could cover to continue to help highlight that, but that's why you would need something above and beyond that, just of the best defense.
Great, thank you both for answering that. So going along with what you said, Greg, earlier, so one of these advanced attacks comes in and appears to be heading towards the goal portion that is not covered by InterceptX. Can you describe how MTR would kick in when it's faced with one of those advanced attacks?
Yeah, so I think the best way for people to think about this is most attacks that take place are not single stage at this point. In other words, when you go and open up an email and people show these demos of malicious attachments, you open an attachment and then it just drops ransomware on that particular endpoint. That's not really efficient from an adversarial perspective, because in most of those cases, you know, unless they have really advanced tooling, which is hard to do right now, they're just going to only encrypt files on a single endpoint or a server, and that's not a good way for them to maximize their revenue. So in most cases, these are multi-stage attacks where they're really trying to establish a foothold. Think about this, for those of you who are familiar with the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, as being a chronology where you can kind of move back and forth. The last stage in most cases is the actual ransomware delivery, but it takes months to lead up to it. So there's a whole reconnaissance period where they're looking to just establish either like a listener or, you know, a remote access shell on one system. And then they're trying to find the critical assets. They're trying to actually discover the network, what systems there are, the OSs, the applications that are running on them, so that they can determine vulnerabilities. And then they're also trying to determine if they can steal credentials, especially admin credentials, what we commonly think of as privilege escalation, all in the hopes of finding the critical assets within the organization. And this is something that normally takes weeks or months. So we're actually monitoring at all these stages of the attack. So we're doubling up. InterceptX really is a tool of tools, just like MTR is a hunt of hunts, meaning we're monitoring all through that different kill chain where we will interfere with the attack at multiple stages. So if you have an unmanaged asset at the end of the day, we're still gonna be able to monitor for all that activity if you have those connectors, but most of the good stuff lives on the endpoints and servers, and we'll still be able to interfere with it. And I would hope, if you did have an unmanaged asset, that we get MTR on it as soon as possible, or if you're considering it, getting InterceptX Advanced on it as soon as possible. And we've got coverage for, you know, Windows, Mac, and Linux already, so there's not too many reasons why you wouldn't have that covered.
All right, thank you, Greg. If anyone else has any final questions, get them inputted now. Otherwise, if you think of something later, we have the follow-up email going out with the recording of this webinar 2 hours after this webinar concludes, and you can reply to that email any questions you have, and we'll make sure we get them answered. Seeing no more questions come in, I think we'll just wrap it up there. And I'll say thank you once again to Greg and Anthony for presenting to us today. I don't think people really realize the quality of presenters we're able to get here, but these are some high-profile Sophos employees. We're grateful to have them and their expertise to share with us today. And I hope that you found the webinar beneficial and can have some action items that you might be thinking about within your organizations as a result of this webinar. So thanks again, Greg and Anthony, and for all you for attending, and we hope to see you on the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, everyone.